First of all, no orgasms. And
Suicide, self-harm.
you cannot have pleasure.
Yeah, I would breed racing horses.
How deep? Orgasms are forbidden.
The modern world is so sanitary.
Artificial insemination.
They use their passion for self-discovery.
Awaken your chakra, Nikita. We're not advocating for war, right? Let's do it.
Glisse tes ailes sous le tapis du vent. Voyage, voyage, éternellement.
Nikita, could you imagine a world where the government would literally control not only each and every single one of your moves, but also your thoughts? Why your thoughts? Because thinking is the prelude of any action, correct?
Right, before something exists materially, it has an immaterial precedence.
Could you imagine that the way of the government of controlling your thoughts is controlling language?
Well, I would not be surprised, because language is the material with which we construct our thoughts.
So you mean if somebody tells you what to say and what not to say, it's like he's telling you what to think and not to think?
And therefore he is exercising control over you.
So a world like that could exist?
Of course, as long as you can control language and control thought, you can control people.
But then there's no more freedom, not even individual and spiritual freedom.
No creative freedom, no freedom of liberty, no freedom to exercise and create with your peers.
Who could imagine a world like that?
Well, a certain English author did.
The G?
The G-O, the G Orwell. George Orwell, we're talking about, our second episode on George Orwell. We did Animal Farm a couple of episodes ago. I believe it was our second episode even.
Yes.
And now we're revisiting our good buddy George, Mr. Orwell himself, as you might know him, to discuss his more prominent work, 1984.
84.
And now why'd he pick the year 1984? It sounds kind of arbitrary, no? All he did really was he was writing in 1948 and he was like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if I switched the numbers around? And we got 1984.
Voila. And plus, that novel is of a high-end importance because as Orwell's novels, like any novel about Orwell, like Animal Farm was a warning.
Yes.
Correct?
Of the dangers of communism.
Exactly. And 1984 is a warning too about what he thought was the state going to.
Yes.
Because let's remember that Orwell used to live at a time of the two world wars.
Yes.
So he witnessed the nuclear Armageddon that happened on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Exactly.
And he was scared of what could happen at the aftermath of the two world wars.
That even sets the scene for the novel. We're in a post-nuclear apocalyptic world.
Yes.
With three superstates, Oceania, East Asia, and
Eurasia.
And Eurasia. Correct. That sets the scene for Orwell. Like you said, we're in the era of ideology. That's the question which confronts Orwell. He's witnessed the defeat of fascism, and the only two ideologies left to assert themselves against the world are communism and liberalism. And he sees, or he attempts to force, like you said, it's a warning. I'd say it's an anticipatory novel. It's a history of future times. He does the same thing as Immanuel Kant does. When Immanuel Kant writes the universal history with the cosmopolitan purpose, he says, I am writing a predictive history, a history of future times. The difference is Kant is a lot more optimistic. He says liberalism, peace, democracy. Orwell is a lot more pessimistic. And he even offers at the end of that novel a very pessimistic ending where our protagonist is crushed by his state. So he's offering us a history of future times, a cautionary tale.
Even Thomas Hobbes with the video we've made about the state of nature and the Leviathan was a warning too,
yes,
right?
So of what could happen without government. So that's funny. England produced two very contrasting assessments of the fate of government. Hobbes gives us what happens without government, and Orwell gives us what happens with too much government.
Ah, nice. Yes, I see. And Orwell discusses about how the state, because of people getting scared and getting atomized, because there's no more family structure in the state after the nuclear Armageddon that he would imagine, because let us remember that it's the beginning of the Cold War. Yes. So you have two superpowers, atomic superpowers that are confronting themselves.
Yes,
and
creating conditions of constant fear.
Exactly. So he was imagining a world after a nuclear Armageddon that was not bipolar, tripolar.
Yes.
So there was East Asia, Eurasia, and Oceania.
Yes.
And what we can notice that is quite interesting is that there was one single party that was leading the country. There was no opposition.
Yes.
And your fealty and loyalty was towards the party, not towards your country.
Exactly. Not towards a national interest, but towards an ideological interest.
Exactly. And plus, it's quite interesting how producing children is not even an act of love.
No.
It's just...
It's a commodity to sustain the party.
He talks about it, the main character, Winston. Winston Smith talks about his wife that was designated for him by the party, always tells him, we need to do and to produce, we need to make our duty towards the party.
This is a typical communist thing.
Yes.
Romania, for example, there was a big government subsidy program to subsidize families. Not even subsidize, but like there were big benefits for couples that started families. Even North Korea in our day, very recently, there was a video of Kim Jong-un crying and pleading on the national media.
To make children.
Exactly, begging the women of North Korea to become mothers and have children. So childbirth and the union of a man and a woman to produce a child is no longer an act of love. It's simply a necessity. It's a necessity for the party.
It's breeding.
Yes.
Yes.
It's the commodification of women, of humans as though they were livestock.
Completely. And what's interesting is that there's no more family structures. Meaning in the novel we can see how, I was saying, Winston Smith talks about how his wife, his designated wife, designated by the party, just requires from him to proceed with the duty towards the party, meaning producing a child. And plus the child, it's quite interesting because there was a certain, I would say, a cut between the fathers and the sons after the nuclear Armageddon. Like there was no more, because the men died in the war.
Right, yes.
So then they took the children who were a bit clueless of the past, of their past traditions. They even forgot the church's name. There's an episode where Winston sees like a painting of a church and he's like, oh, I know that place. It's an old building. It's called St. Andrew. And it was a church back then. Oh, what is a church? So they've forgotten every single piece or even memory of the past. Therefore, there's no more family and private structures.
Yes.
And you can see how the children are raised not by their families,
but by the state,
by the
the
state.
party.
And plus, what happens when the children are raised by the state? They're agents of the state that are watching you constantly.
Exactly.
And there's Winston's friend who was like a plumber or something, and he was denounced by his children. And he was like, oh, I'm so happy that my children denounced me. Like, look what beautiful citizens I've produced.
Yes, yes.
You see?
Yes, the state gains superiority over the family.
And what does it say in the Bible? Like, woe to a nation where the prince is a child, right? Where children turn against their parents.
Yes, yes. And so this brings us to a main theme in the Orwellian philosophy, which is collectivism.
Yes.
Collectivism is the precedence of the collective, the mass of people, over the individual, right? And so both communism and fascism are different forms of collectivism. And what it does is it seeks to crush the individual in the name of the state, in the name of, not even in the name of some national interest, but in the name of a state, in the name of the ideology.
And they talk about an interesting ideology called INCSOC. INCSOC is like the ideology of the party.
Yes.
And in Oceania, where Winston Smith lives, it's INCSOC. In East Asia, it's like the cult of death. And Eurasia, it's neo-Bolshevism, a reference to Bolshevism, whatever. And let's get something clear. 1984 was produced and, of course, funded by the CIA, as was Animal Farm during the Cold War period. So it's quite interesting that the biggest secret services in the world decided to fund that movie. So you should listen to us, I would think, and I would say. So that novel had a significant part to play in that war of minds during the Cold War.
That's what it is, yes.
And of changing and engineering the minds of the population in the US to make them and help them understand what the foreign policy was about. And plus, Winston Smith is a man who lives in a country where INCSOC is the main ideology. There is no more religion.
INCSOC meaning English socialism. But it's not spelled ENG-SOC, it's spelled ING-SOC. Because the language has deteriorated in the modern day. We'll touch on that at a later point.
And plus, after the nuclear Armageddon, Great Britain doesn't exist anymore. It's called Area something. It's just like a piece of land.
Exactly.
Right?
There's no antiquity to it.
No.
There's no tale. There's no heroic past.
Yes.
You're not supposed to have an affinity to it.
No, like,
you're not supposed to have an identity.
It's like nowadays they destroy old buildings and things that are meant to stay and are part of the land, and they replace them with glass buildings that would get destroyed a couple of years after.
That could be recognized anywhere in the world.
Right? Like you need not to have an attachment to your land, right?
Exactly.
You shouldn't be attached to your land.
You shouldn't feel a devotion to your land.
No.
Because it's even a type of sovereignty. This sovereignty is the seat of power.
Yes.
And all totalitarian regimes, whether it's communist, fascist, whatever, seek to be the sole sovereign. Seek to be the sole sovereign. It's why communists are very atheistic.
They destroy God, first
Exactly. Because God cannot be God. The state must be God. The supreme leader must be God. In every communist country, I'll give my example, of course, of Albania. Albania proclaimed itself to be the first atheistic state. Everything that had to do with religion was destroyed. The mosques, the cathedral, all of it. And rather than, let's say you go to Brazil, for example. In Brazil, every household has a portrait of Jesus Christ.
Yes.
Right? Whereas in Albania, and I'm sure it's true of other totalitarian regimes as well, you have rather a portrait of the leader.
So now, instead of worshipping an ideal embodied by religion, which is an ideal, an ideal, you're worshipping a living man.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly. It's the state retaking the role of God. There's a very perverted story. When communism was instauring itself in Cuba, they would take the children in the school, the state would come, the soldiers would come, they'd say, okay, children, you're going to pray to God, you're going to plead to the Lord for candy. And close your eyes, plead to the Lord for candy. And they would leave the children's hands empty.
Yes.
And they said, now I want you to pray to Fidel Castro. We want you to pray to the leader. Put your hands out, close your eyes, and what the soldiers would do while they were pleading to Fidel Castro is they would put the candy in the hands of the kids to replace the omnipresence of God with a different type of omnipresence. The omnipresence of the state, the omnipresence of ideology.
Interesting.
That's how it's achieved. And because religion is a type of sovereignty. If you want to achieve a totalitarian regime, you cannot have it that people are aligned and have an allegiance to anything other than yourself. You need to produce a cult of personality, a cult of allegiance to the leadership.
So how's society structured in Oceania? First of all, there's the proles. The proles are the majority of people.
Yes.
They're the people who do not partake in the party ideologies and whatever. They're just the working force, the proletariat.
Yeah, that's what it's short for even, proletariat.
Voila. Then you have the outer party. The people who are the machine and who make the machine of the government work.
We might say bureaucrats.
Civil servants.
Yes.
Then you have the inner party. The inner party are the ones who do not clap when there's a huge party meeting. And when there's hate week, we'll discuss that.
Yes.
And the inner party are, we could say, the esoteric guys.
The people that are not known.
They're not known, and plus they have access to everything that the outer party and the proles cannot have access to, like coffee, like proper cigarettes.
We can compare it to the communist oligarchy.
Of course, right?
But we can even compare it in the modern day to what this is not what I call them, what I've read in the literature, super bureaucrats.
Yes.
People whose faces you will never see, people whose names you will never know.
What we call the deep state.
The deep state, you might say, whose faces you will never see, whose names you will never know, but who have spent a long career in the back rooms, in the back offices of the parliament buildings, consulting, and they have developed such a profound expertise of their specific field that it is impossible to challenge them, and it is impossible to displace them because they're not elected officials.
Yes.
That's what we might compare it to nowadays, the super bureaucrats.
Technocrats.
Exactly.
Yes, and I would say that that society of Oceania is structured that way. So you have three classes, right? And it's still like, there's no egalitarianism, right? Like, no one is equal, right? You have classes, well-defined classes. And what's interesting there is that the guy, O'Brien, starts discussing the party structure with Winston, when in the book you'll discover that. Or there's a movie even that you can watch, very interesting and scary at the same time. O'Brien discusses how the party is going to outlive anybody else by not using breeding or lineage as a source of power, but just ideology, meaning he compares it to the institutions that survive the falls and the declines and the upheavals of history. For example, the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is not by lineage, not by descent, but by elective and selective, and I would say ideological choosings. Of course, we're not saying if it's good or bad, it's just a simple observation. And therefore, the structure of that party would be the same way. The inner party is composed of people who are not necessarily born to inner party members, but who are simply well-versed in the INCSOC ideology.
They're the spokespeople of the ideology.
They're the priests of that ideology. They're new priests. And therefore, the party can never die because the party's goal is not to achieve lineage power. It's not to achieve monetary abundance Well, of course, the inner party, just like the communists, right? What's the thing about the oligarchy in the communists? They were capitalists.
Exactly.
Quite interesting. And they look at the capitalist, by the way, as like a remnant of the past, as somebody who would exploit people who used to wear hats, and you needed to call them sir. Like, what a demeaning word, calling people sir. Like you're subservient to them, right, sir? So
Yes, sir.
So you live in a state where the classes are still divided, right? It's like Animal Farm.
Yes.
Right? They use ideology to promote equality, then they simply install another regime with the same caste system.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Voila. So, other than that, what's quite interesting is the structure of the international relation scene. The international scene is made of, as we've said, a tripolar
Yes.
world.
While a bipolar world emerged after the Second World War, Orwell imagines a tripolar world.
And there's something quite interesting that Orwell wants to point on.
Yes.
Freedom is being able to say that 2 + 2 = 4. And there's an interesting part in the book and in the movie where you can see that O'Brien tortures Winston for him to say that 2 + 2 = 5. Because the party said it's 5. And then, again, in any society where war is achievable towards victory, where you can win a war, the aristocracy or the ruling elite cannot be that bad intentioned. They cannot just brainwash the population to think that 2 + 2 = 5 because they need to win. And societies that are the most efficient are societies that prevail and are societies that would endure and pass the test of time. That is war. That is why we're at war, Nikita. How many planes, Nikita?
But it's I see 2 over there and 2 over there.
Perfect. So what if the party says there are 5?
Oh yeah, because I'm a socialist or because I'm an INGSOC. Because I'm an INGSOC, the party says that 2 + 2 = 5.
So how many planes?
Oh, there's 5 planes.
We're dead.
We're dead.
The civilization disappears.
Exactly.
But how many planes are there?
Let's say you're not obsessed with ideology.
Yes.
Let's say you confront things as they are. You're not brainwashed. You see 2 planes there, 2 planes there, is 4 planes.
4 planes.
You're confronting the truth.
So we can fight those planes knowing there are 4 planes and we will survive. Because
Exactly.
war, and that's the point of Orwell. We're not advocating for war, right? But the point of Orwell is when there's war, there's a return to sanity,
Exactly.
right?
What René Guénon might call revelation, crisis.
Voila.
Yes.
Apocalypse means revelation.
Exactly.
It's a revelation of what is true. If you think that 2 + 2 = 5, war will just,
Overrun you.
voila, it will just make you understand that, no, my friend, 2 + 2 = 4. Because
And that group of people that is closer to the truth than you are will enforce the truth upon you. Will act in the name of the cycle of history to enforce universal truth upon you.
And by the way, there's something quite interesting about the relationship between men and women. There's the story of that girl, Julia, who saw Winston. Julia is a proud member of the party. She always shouts on Hate Week. What is Hate Week, by the way?
We might compare it to the protests of our time,
Yes.
right? Hate Week is a public spectacle
Yes.
whereby all the mass of people gather. The propaganda is put before them. There's a mass spectacle. Big Brother shows up on the telescreen, and they all shout and let out their anger and their aggression.
It's a nice way to cure their nevroses.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It's like a nightclub, right?
Exactly.
Like
all types of spectacle. All types of spectacle. The modern world is so sanitary and so clean and so safe that there are no outlets for aggression, or let's say productive outlets for aggression. Right? Each person has in them, like we discussed in the Nietzsche video, a will to power. Each person has some latent force that wants to drive them towards their actualization.
Like aggression exists.
Exactly. And aggression does not mean violence. Aggression means the force
Energy.
towards exactly.
Energy,
the
will to
force
power.
towards actualization, to assert yourself against the world. Right? Like we said, humanism is man asserting himself against nature.
So nowadays, how do most people like exert their
aggression, right?
Their aggression? Either they use drugs.
They revert to vices.
They revert to vices like drugs, like just throwing the fire out of the dragon before the time. Like, for example, partaking into pornography.
Or even extreme alcoholism, let's say.
Yes.
Gambling,
Or
phone
nightclubs.
addiction.
Screaming in a big box where
Exactly.
you cannot even have a clear discussion with a beautiful person from the
Opposite gender.
opposite
let's
gender,
say.
right? You're just jumping and screaming.
Of
It's pure hate week. It's pure neurosis.
If you do not have productive outlets for your aggression, let's say with the cultivation of a beautiful front lawn, with the development of a great podcast, then you're going to use your aggression against yourself. As Nietzsche says, you know the saying, in times of peace, the bellicose man
Fights against himself.
fights against himself. Suicide, self-harm, vices. It's why if you don't have productive outlets for your aggression, you will turn them against yourself, or you will unleash it in more violent forms.
And plus, they try to make you feel ashamed of yourself and of your nature. Like you should feel ashamed of, for example, in that story about Julia and Winston. So Julia is a girl who's like from the anti-sex league. There's something called the anti-sex league. It promotes, first of all, no orgasms. Orgasms are forbidden. All you need to do.
What a disaster.
All you need to do is just to have like to proceed to your duty to the party. Okay. You cannot have pleasure. You cannot feel any human emotion. All you need to do is procreate.
Because it takes you away from your devotion to the state. If you're devoted to another person, if you're in love with another person, that detracts from the love that you can devote to the state.
And plus, let's be honest, there's a quite interesting part where Julia and Winston go to the nature, and it's like a return to the Garden of Eden, and then it's very intense, like they make love, and it brings them back to their animalistic nature, that man becomes like, I would say, man pleasures woman, woman is pleasured, and is quite beautiful and natural sex. It's not just producing. It's not just artificial insemination.
It's not breeding.
It's not breeding. It's making love, and plus, it's a beautiful return at the Garden of Eden, and society more and more tries to, of course, in the novel of Orwell. We're not criticizing modern society, God forbids. Society tries more and more to, I would say, consummate and dissipate human passions. Like instead of teaching human how to tame them and control them,
or use their passion productively, or use their passion for self-discovery,
they're trying to just destroy them by drugs, by alcoholism, by how can I say masturbation?
Huh?
Masturbation.
You can say masturbation.
Yes. By drugs, by alcoholism.
Or you know what's even a more like formal way?
Yes.
Onanism.
How?
Onanism. Like that's even how it shows up in the Bible.
How do you call that?
Onanism.
Onanism.
Yes.
Drugs, alcoholism, promiscuity, onanism, and pornography. That is how you simply waste your energy without procreation, without starting a family. And
with no production, with no outcome.
Exactly. So those powers should stay private, in the private sphere, because we've seen Fustel de Coulanges referring as the family having a private cult.
A domestic religion, a domestic faith, yes.
The fealty and loyalty of the children is, before being to the state, is to the father and to the family. So the family comes first.
Yes.
The state's role is just to help the family grow.
And cooperate with other families.
Yes, the state doesn't own your children, my
Nope.
friends.
Nope.
Well, in 1984 they do. And more and more we can see on the international scene something quite interesting. War is not made to gain territory or to win war.
No. War doesn't have a national interest. You're not regaining the Alsace-Lorraine, for example. Or you're not acquiring some commodity field. War has nothing to do with that. War has no longer any pragmatic basis.
War is made to scare the population
Exactly.
with news.
Headlines, with propaganda.
By the way, Julia works at the Ministry of Pornography, by the way.
That's what it's called.
Yes, and Winston works at the Ministry of Truth, so his job is just to make lies, right? And there is the Ministry of Love, which is the ministry which tortures you, throughout the thought police. So the thought police are the people who would arrest you for thinking without doing, right? So for example, you thinking, or people thinking that you're thinking that you want to proceed to some crime without you even doing something, could arrest you and imprison you. Interesting, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Because as soon as the thought occurs of rebellion, the possibility occurs of
Right?
rebellion.
Right. Thought crime, right?
Exactly.
Yes. So Winston works at the Ministry of Truth, and therefore he meets Julia, and they come back to their state of nature of men and women, and they have to hide, and then they get caught, and then they get tortured and whatever. But what's interesting is that the international scene, war, as Nikita said, is not to gain territory. It's not to regain the Alsace-Lorraine. It's not to regain the Falklands. No. War is made to scare the population.
And each of the superstates are in agreement with each other. Let's prolong this war just so we can assert fear over the people.
Exactly.
In the name of
So,
totalitarianism.
for example, there's a missile that bombed you, right, in your neighborhood. No, it's not East Asia that bombed you. It's Oceania that bombed Oceania to make you just comply. Because human beings are ready to just waver freedom for security,
Yes.
for safety.
Yes.
So the more you bomb Oceania, the more the people in Oceania will be like, okay, we need to listen to the
Yes,
party.
state. Yes, state.
Yes, state, of course, state. As long as I'm safe, I don't have a family, I can't start a family, I can't have a proper relationship with somebody from the opposite sex, but it's okay. Like, I'm going to be your machine at the Ministry of Truth.
Another thing, the Ministry of Plenty is actually a ministry that makes things scarce.
Oh.
Makes people impoverished, for example.
So-
right? And like I think I said this in the Nietzsche video, like your financial resources as part of your will to power. Money allows you to express yourself.
Yes.
Like the only thing that's keeping me from acquiring and breeding racing horses is the fact that I don't have enough money
Voilà.
to do that, right? Whereas if I had more money, I would breed racing horses and I would become an incredible chevalier. But the fact that I don't have enough money is preventing me from doing that, right? And let's say your goal is not to breed racing horses, but just to start a family, for example. If you do not have the funds to do it in the first place, you cannot start a family, right? So the Ministry of Plenty is also
So they
the
want to...
Ministry of Scarcity is made to repress your ability to actualize yourself. Don't have commodities, don't have funds, don't attempt to actualize yourself, don't express yourself, don't exchange, don't involve yourself in the exchange with your peers.
Don't accumulate wealth.
Don't become powerful.
They give you rations. For example, on the news, there's a 25% increase
to the
of
chocolate.
the chocolate ration.
Yes.
Voilà, it's fake. It's fake. Nobody's seeing it.
Because
in their
just the
lives.
week before, there was a 25% decrease. You're constantly bombarded by contradictions and you don't know what is true.
And that is interesting. Contradiction. And that
Yes.
is how the inner party explains how to control the population. You need to make contradictions
Yep. So that
equal.
people cannot... yes.
So the Ministry of Love is the ministry actually of hate and torture. The Ministry of Plenty is the Ministry of Nothingness. The Ministry of Truth is the Ministry of Lie.
Lies.
So it's just a transfiguration. It's just
It's what they call double talk or double speak.
double think.
Double think.
It's
Yes.
double think. You need
Yes.
to think everything and its opposite.
It's pure
Right?
propaganda.
Like those politicians, man, in the book, of course, they always say the same thing and its opposite. So people become bipolar. They're like, oh, is politics going to save us? No, my friend. No, Winston. Politics is never going to save you. Okay? The salon is. Okay?
And you are. And the salon is going to help you
Voilà.
by empowering you with knowledge. Now, double think. It's a complete... for me, it has its origins with Edouard Bernays.
Edward Bernays.
Yes.
Yes, propaganda.
Who was it? Wasn't he like the nephew of Sigmund Freud or something?
Edward Bernays is the nephew of Sigmund Freud
Yes.
and the uncle
Of the current...
of one of the guys who founded Netflix.
There you go.
And Edward Bernays used
in
to
the
work. He used to work for somebody. He used to work for the CIA and for the big tobacco companies. I'll give you an
Yes.
example. For
Yes.
example, people wanted to make women smoke. It was like badly seen that a woman can smoke. So,
Exactly.
So what Edward Bernays made was he gave money to some women in Chicago so they could start a revolt,
Yes.
protest for women's rights, so they could start smoking. Right.
Exactly.
So cigarette was now the symbol of
femininity,
freedom,
of strength, of
okay?
rebellion. Yes.
Of freedom. Okay.
Yes,
that is how
that thing.
he doubled the sales of the big tobacco companies.
Yes.
So always, my friends, when we look at a certain ideology that is pushed on us in the name of freedom, of liberty, who wouldn't like women to be free, right? Everybody would love it, right? Everybody would agree with the women's rights. Every sane people would agree with saving babies or for having no wars or having liberty, freedom, love. Everybody. But there's something pushed behind it always.
There's always a pretext.
For monetary gain.
Of course. When Edward Bernays, he's also the guy that framed the First World War as being a fight for liberty and democracy. That comes from Edward Bernays.
He used to work for the CIA.
Exactly. He did all type, you have to read his book. We might even link it in our description, even though this episode is not about him. He's still very relevant. Propaganda.
It's a very small book, by the way,
Yes,
sorry.
yes. And what he realized, and this is very funny, what he realized is that propaganda, that art form which he began, propaganda had gained a bad name. So he invented his own manner of doublethink.
How did he call it?
Public relations.
Ah,
Public relations. It's not propaganda anymore, it's public relations. Let's make relations with the public.
yes.
Meaning, let's make relations with the public by bombarding them with information and contradictions and not allowing them to have their own opinions. There's that expression that people always encourage you to do, which is think on your own behalf. Oh, think on your own behalf. Well, we're always...
How deep.
Oh, that's so profound.
Like be the sun who just shines from his
Exactly,
own light.
Emanate energy
Oh
and
la la.
radiation, like as if
Awaken your chakra, Nikita.
as if information does not exist in a vacuum. Knowledge does not exist in a vacuum.
Winston Churchill used to say we're just a book of many books.
What John Locke said, John Locke understood this. He says, man is a blank slate. He's a tabula rasa. He's a tabula rasa.
Tabula rasa.
Exactly. And what happens is reality puts impressions upon him.
Yes.
Right? Whether you read a book, it makes an impression on you. You're like a soft clay tablet. The book puts an impression on you. It's up to you to make it so that over time that clay hardens and that you are less, let's say, impressionable, right? So we're never really thinking on behalf of ourselves. We're always thinking under the influence of something else.
Of course.
Because no thought is original.
Of course. And we're the product of human experience. Like
course.
our own selves being here is the product of
Generations,
human
millennia.
experience. And plus, like we have a certain like set of notions installed in us, which is called the instinct. And the instinct is just the reflexes. For example,
Exactly.
if I do this,
Ooh,
up, you see?
At the doctor's office, let's say.
Voila. He's going to move his leg because it's a reflex, right? Because it's an instinct, because it's something that is inner in him.
Yes.
Okay? So everything comes from something. Okay? You did not invent the wheel, my friend. We invented the salon. Okay?
But we did not invent the podcast,
Voila.
for example.
Voila. For example, what we're doing right now is not something new.
Plato and Socrates.
Aristotle, yes.
Yeah, they beat us to it like 2,000, 3,000 years
The
ago.
Republic.
Yeah.
What we're doing right here
We're
with the
3,000
podcast,
years late, guys.
we're having a discussion because we're sharpening each other's point of view and blade.
Yes.
Because the only way of learning and thinking is with somebody else, is through discussion.
Mm-hmm.
That is how you think.
Ideas need to clash. Swords need to clash to become sharper, right?
Exactly.
John Stuart Mill, one of my favorite guys, you always make...
Before you talk about that, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
For example, I thought that Nikita was magnificent. Now, he thought that he was astonishingly handsome. Okay? We had two different sets of ideas, but did we clash with them? Of course not. We just took our blades, sharpened them together, and we came into a better answer and a better enlightened conclusion, which is Nikita is mesmerizing. So that is how, with different opinions, you can always come to a conclusion
Exactly.
that fits well and is even better.
That's a very Greek idea.
Yes.
Like the idea of argument is not to say that my argument is better, your argument is better, one is right, one is wrong.
Is let's seek the truth.
Exactly.
Yes.
The idea of argument is not to impose mine upon yours.
By the way, what is the truth? Because nowadays people think that you having an opinion and somebody else having an opinion makes it to truth. But no. Nikita, tell me something. There's a pyramid. Somebody standing up.
At the apex of the pyramid.
At the apex of the pyramid.
He looks down on it.
And yes, and is looking down on it. What does he see?
He sees the outline of a square.
So he sees a square.
That's what he sees.
Now, there's somebody who's standing below the pyramid, and he's looking upwards. What does he see?
He sees another square.
So, there's somebody who's standing in the middle.
Yes.
What does he see?
He sees all of the corners and edges converging at the vertex. He sees
So-
the base.
so-
So he sees a pyramid.
So, wait, you have three opinions. You have three truths, therefore.
No, there's one objective truth.
So what's the truth then?
The truth is somewhere in the middle. The truth
It's the
is,
middle.
It's the golden mean, the golden middle,
So
as Aristotle would say.
It's the one who has the better vantage point.
Exactly.
So, what does that mean?
It's even the same thing in Hegel. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Voila. So, do you have a square or a pyramid?
You have a pyramid.
So, okay. So that means that the two opinions of the other two guys are invalid.
No.
And are false.
What they need to do is meet each other in the middle.
Perfect. Voila.
There you go.
As simple as that.
And that's kind of the premise that like I said, John Stuart Mill comes up with. He
Yes.
says the reason why America has been able to advance and progress so greatly and so much more rapidly in such shorter time than any other nation or any other people on earth.
Yes.
It's not because there's some genetic quality of Americans or whatever. No, it's because Americans are believers in freedom of expression.
Yes.
And the freedom to express yourself means even the freedom to be wrong. You are free to be incorrect. You are free to make mistakes. You're even free to learn from others. You are free to exchange your ideas with each other, because it's in that context that we gain a greater clairvoyance of the truth. This brings me back to something O'Brien says in the book. He says, there can be no erroneous thought. There can be no erroneous thought. Thinking wrongly is impermissible. And that's very, very much to the detriment of progress. Because if you cannot have the exchange of ideas, you do not have progress, right? This is why America was able to progress, because they believed so deeply in that idea of freedom of expression. China, for example, this is the argument that John Stuart Mill makes, that's the great civilization. He says China stagnated because when they implemented their imperial service, they became very conformist.
The Han Dynasty.
Exactly.
They made the civil servant into a school, and then the French
Exactly.
copied them.
Exactly.
With Napoleon, yes.
And the reason why they stopped stagnating was because they limited freedom of expression and they became very conformist. They made, like, the imperial service became a mass production line for scholars and civil servants, and you had no more clashing of ideas and no more progress.
Yes. Why was Italy during the Renaissance so creative? Like,
It's because you had all those principalities.
there was an explosion of the creative power.
Yes.
Because all of those principalities were clashing with each other. Somebody built a beautiful cathedral. The other prince was like, no.
I need a better one.
Voilà. So
Mine's going to be better and bigger.
there was a diversification of thought.
Yes.
You see, and that is how you have progress.
Yes.
As simple as that. For example, me and Nikita always compete on who's going to be the most elegant, eloquent, and well, of course, I always win. But he's getting better and better each day, correct?
You gotta put those ties on, man.
All right.
You gotta step up the tie game. I can see too much of your beautiful, magnificent pectoralis.
I'll stop that, Nicholas. We need to pause that. So, competition freedom of expression brings competition. Competition brings innovation. Innovation creates progress. That is why the basis is freedom of expression.
Exactly.
So everything starts with freedom of expression, dear friends. Voila. So listen, you are what you consume, okay? Stop scrolling on TikTok, watching people trying to teach you how to be rich by subscribing to their formations, which will make them rich. Big Ponzi schemes. No, just teach the basics of the greatest minds on the planet. Just watch the salon. We're not selling you anything, okay? Exactly. We're just giving you glory, magnificence, eloquence, beauty.
Exactly.
And, of course, inspiration, okay? You don't need to have all of that information. Somebody's telling you to vote this, to vote that. No. Listen to the salon. Because the salon, we're not just like having a simple thought process from our own. We're just repeating what the greatest minds and political theorists of history...
This has nothing to do with us and everything to do about the canon.
Voila, we're just the messengers, you see?
We were saying earlier, man is a tabula rasa, for example. Ideas have origins. There's no such thing as an original thought. But the state is trying to eliminate this. The state is trying to erase this. The reason why they destroyed all those texts and destroyed all those churches and destroyed the memory of all those authors is so that the state can be the only point of origin of knowledge.
You know, my friend, a man who knows his classics is not just thrown easily to the trash and garbage of history.
Exactly.
You see?
The deep rocks aren't gusted by
So a man
who
knows his history is capable of saying no.
Exactly.
You see, and people don't want, like the government, not of course, the government in the book, right? The government doesn't want people to say no. They want people to comply.
To conform.
And of course, let's be quite honest. Government, as the Americans would see it, as being an enemy, as something that shouldn't be here.
It's unnatural, yeah.
As something unnatural, isn't quite what Orwell is telling us. He's not telling us that government is evil. No. There is a certain...
In fact, he was even a socialist himself. Orwell was a socialist.
Voila.
Yeah, continue.
So what I would say, like, no government is Hobbes' state of nature. Chaos, destruction. Too much government is 1984.
Exactly.
There's a balance. Because from that point, okay, from 1984, the pyramid is a square. from
Hobbes' point.
From Hobbes' point,
It's another square.
it's another square. Let's get into the middle.
Let's get the salon perspective.
Let's get the salon perspective. Yes. Let's see the pyramid as being a pyramid. Let's see Nikita as being a magnificent young man.
Okay.
Let's look at me as being a dashing and most eligible.
Bachelor.
Voila. Let's look at things the way they are.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Let's go back to that theme of the erasure of history then. It's no longer Great Britain. It's Area 57 or whatever.
Yes.
Right? Because, again, by erasing your history, you have no point of reference. The purpose of studying history is not to say this date and this time. Like, the reason why people study the Battle of Thermopylae is not to say that there were 300 Spartans or 3,000 Spartans. The point of knowing the number of Spartans is not just so that you know the number of Spartans.
It's to know when to say no.
It's so that you understand the bravery of the Spartans. More important than the precise details of history is the wisdom and the example of heroism that history provides us with. We study the Battle of Thermopylae not because we're concerned with the number of Spartans, but because we're concerned with their courage, because we're concerned with that story of defying the odds.
Well, history is made for you to understand when to say yes and when to say no.
It gives you a frame of reference to criticize and even question what is currently prevailing.
It gives you some limits.
Exactly. And the point of studying history is not to reinstitute it, is not to reinstitutionalize it. That's not the point of studying history.
Of course, like, a man is only free when he is capable of saying no. As simple as that. Spartans, lay down your weapons. Persians, come and take them. No.
Exactly.
No. Okay?
You shoot your arrows, I'll fight in the shade.
Voila.
There you go.
I know because I was there.
He literally looks like Leonidas.
Nikita was in the Horse of Troy. He literally looks like Odysseus. Okay? So we know what we're talking about.
We've been there.
Okay?
We have that generational memory, guys.
Voila. As simple as that. Now, the government
In the book.
is not made for you to just be fruitful and expand. The government is made for you to just bow down, smoke your disgusting cigarettes, drink your victory gin, and comply, wake up, do some exercise in the morning in front of the telescreen. The telescreen is like a screen.
We have to discuss that, by the way.
The telescreen is everywhere. It's omnipotent. It's just the government spreading information all the time. They're telling you, they're formatting you on how to think, like we're doing right now. We're telling you, be free, be intelligent, be individual, be a critical thinker, and think for yourself through us while we think through the greatest minds in history.
Let us be your thoroughfare.
In 1984, the government is telling you, you're going to think that. Because that is how it is. If I think that we're floating and you think that we're floating, then we're floating. Mm-hmm. That's O'Brien's allegory, right?
Power of our minds, yes.
Exactly.
Right? That telescreen is very important because it brings us into technology. George Orwell is also conscious
AI. Ooh, may I? I'm sorry.
AI, go.
Oh, all right. So the telescreen shows the picture of Big Brother. And Winston Smith at the end asks O'Brien, is Big Brother real? Like, is the guy real? And he's like, of course he's real. No, but like, is he real like me? Like, is he a human being? Or
is he made of flesh and bones?
Is he an AI? Like, is the guy an AI? Or whatever. And that's quite eye-opening. Like Orwell, like AI just
emerged.
I mean,
right? It's been in development since the 60s, but yes.
Imagine an era where a certain oligarchy, instead of having their own candidates, could just create an AI of a young gentleman almost as magnificent as Nikita, who could seduce and reduce all of your pains to solutions, would just govern. But that guy wouldn't even exist. He would just be an AI. Imagine if people voted for candidates that don't even exist and that they only see on telescreens.
Well, people are already following influencers that don't even exist. For example, AI influencers.
For example, I know what you did. You spent your last paycheck on some robot on OnlyFans that doesn't even exist. I know that you did it, but you don't even know. She's not real, man. She's not real. Get out there. Get out there. Talk to people.
Talk to Julia. Go in the nature.
Talk to Julia.
Engage in the classic books.
Voila.
Rent out a room.
Write some poetry.
Exactly.
Recite some poetry.
Exactly.
Voila.
Okay. Now, what was I saying about the Big Brother is very important too. Like, first of all, the description of Big Brother. It's the first line in the book, or on the first page. It's there, the description of Big Brother, and he lets you. That's the power of language, by the way. Language is abstract, right? Language lets you imagine things. When I saw the description of the stern face and the mustache, I immediately thought of the two guys, the two big guys of the Second World War, the two stern faces with the mustaches on them, Hitler and Stalin, right?
Yes.
So immediately, language gives you the power to imagine. You're immediately given that you're able to make the symbolic connection between Hitler, Stalin, the mustache, okay, stern face with the mustache. You immediately make the semiotic synthesis, you make the semiosis of these symbols together.
There's something quite interesting. When they catch Winston, they tell him you're not culpable. You're not guilty. You're just insane. You're just crazy. Like the Soviets. The Soviets, when they used to catch dissidents, those dissidents were not just criminals. No.
They were insane. They
were
were mentally
crazy.
unwell.
So when a government tries to make somebody who does not comply with them ideologically,
As being crazy.
look insane, then he's excluded.
Exactly. You're trying to push him beyond the pale of logic and reason. Trying to push him beyond the pale of being engageable with.
So you exclude him from the debate.
Exactly.
He has no more point of view
A
because
complete invalidity.
he's insane.
Exactly.
Voila. Because he
Exactly.
thought of something, he's insane therefore.
Exactly.
Okay?
Right? And why is he called Big Brother? Is because it's the attempt of making it's the attempt of making the autocrat look friendly. It's the attempt of making the autocrat more lovable, more approachable, accessible, right? More lovable, even. You must love your leader.
And your leader is your big brother. You're the little brother, my
Exactly.
friend.
And when Kim Il-sung when the casket of Kim Il-sung is driving down the boulevard, you must cry. You must cry extremely hard. And if you're not crying hard enough, you could get carried away, for example, right? Why? Okay.
Because you should feel sad.
Exactly. You should feel allegiance only to the state. Only to the state. You'll notice a lot of communist propaganda. First of all, communist is very collectivist. I was talking about collectivism earlier, right? You always see images of men alongside each other. You see the union of different talents of the state. You have, let's say, a scholar, a miner, a lumberjack, a scientist, whatever. And leading them, you see the glorious leader.
Yes.
Oftentimes with like a ray of sunshine behind them, which is a reference to Orthodox Christian iconography. You'd have the halo around the icon of the saint. Now you have the image of the sun behind the leader,
Because
and then as the leader being the source of everything.
even Louis XIV
Called himself
Le Roi Soleil, the Sun King,
L'État c'est moi.
because he's the one who shines from his own light. Like most people nowadays, they need to be saved. They need somebody to show them the way. That's why they love those influencers, because they need somebody to teach them how to live. They're completely desperate. But some people know how to live from their own light. And that is the image that any dictator would love to assume and to present.
To depict himself as being the sunlight, as being the sunshine.
Yes.
But even that's why dictators take pictures with babies, kissing with babies and stuff like that. You know, even in Albania, Enver Hoxha was called Jaji, which means sir, but not like sir. It's like the old sir at the park. Like your mother would tell you, "Oh, that sir over there dropped his hat. Could you give it to him?"
Like the grandpa.
Exactly.
Like the respectful grandpa.
Exactly.
Yes.
So
The respectable
by
grandpa.
calling the leader Big Brother, it's like he's looking out for you. There's a fraternal element to
And
it.
plus, Winston, after O'Brien tortured him, he said, I love him.
Exactly.
And you can feel a Stockholm syndrome because he was like, oh, that guy is helping me become sane,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
He's helping me become sane. I'm sick. and
He's instructing me correctly.
He's my doctor. I love him. He's doing it for me,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And voilà, it became completely crazy, completely insane, you
Exactly.
see?
Exactly. Alexander Solzhenitsyn says, when talking about in the Gulag Archipelago,
Yes.
he becomes the eternal lie becomes the constant state of being. The eternal lie becomes the constant state of being, not just for the party, which dispels the lies, but even for the citizens that are trying to evade the repression of the state.
Yes.
We describe the telescreen as being omnipresent and omnipotent. The way that was achieved, now we can even say that the phone achieves that fact.
Of course.
The algorithm categorizes you. You are condemned to be a commodity that's represented by certain vectors matching in the algorithm of an artificial intelligence. You are condemned to be represented in an Excel spreadsheet That's it. That's what modernity and totalitarianism and technology has done to you. But in the era before such technologies were available, it was done through a network of spies, right?
Yes.
And so you'll notice something. Eastern Europeans have a very specific, very particular sense of humor. Have you noticed that? Eastern Europeans are very ironic. And the reason for it is because of communism. It's because you could never tell. First of all, humor helps alleviate certain tensions, whatever. Yes, but it's also a way to evade the state. It's also a way to evade being reported.
Yes,
Like,
yes.
if you're always ironic, if you're always double-speaking, nobody can actually tell the truth.
When you live in a place where you could get imprisoned for what you said, you can always be excessive with what people expect from you. Like, for example, go to the field and collect the wheat, and you'd be like, oh, I've always dreamt of collecting the wheat on the field that's not even mine. Let's do it. Right?
For
like
example,
you start developing a certain
extreme irony.
tragicomédie. Like, it's tragic and comic. Like,
Yes.
Like, how am I here? Right?
Cesare Borgia's cardinal.
Yeah.
So we can even attribute the developed that irony, that sarcasm, Eastern European sense of humor to communism and the fear of constantly being spied on, which is today achieved by the algorithm. And so the eternal lie becomes the constant state of being.
So 1984, my dear friends, is a great book that you should definitely read for a simple reason. We're telling you to. Voilà. Well, okay. 1984, let's do that, is a great book that you should read, first of all, to develop some critical thinking, to understand what too much state could produce.
To be conscious of media, propaganda, ideology.
Again, don't become like a neo-anarchist revolutionary while you still have...
Don't engage in the hate week. Don't make hate week every week.
Yes, like don't think that everybody's your enemy, and especially the government, because we've understood that no government meant the state of nature. Too much government meant the 1984.
Exactly.
Stay balanced.
Exactly.
Stay balanced in your thoughts. Stay balanced in your life. And do not lean into extreme ways of thinking.
Yes. Umberto Eco says at least three quarters of what Orwell is talking about is not negative utopia, it's actual history. Albeit, like I said, a predictive history.
Yes.
So use this book to predict your own history.
And remember, 2 + 2
equals 5. Psych, it's 4. Psych, contradiction. We're the ministry of truth.
I don't know.
Point demonstrated.
Well,
there's another point. I've always said that language is the first casualty of totalitarianism, because the more sophisticated your language, the more you can enter into abstraction, right? There's only really 300 words you need to partake in the daily material affairs, but there's over 100,000 words in the language.
be nuanced, ladies and gentlemen. And the only way to be more nuanced is to have more vocabulary.
Exactly.
More vocabulary means more options to think.
More imaginative capacity.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Do not take just yes or no for an answer. Be more intricate, more delicate.
Exactly.
Okay?
Gaze into abstraction.
Get into the complexities of the kingdom of thought.
Acquire the materials to construct your inner kingdom. Don't just learn one language, learn two. Don't just learn English, learn French.
Don't just subscribe, like and share.
Click the link in our description.
And I would say 2 + 2
Equals 4.
Voilà.
Voila.
Voilà qui je suis. Mais voilà même ici, mes années c'est fini. C'est mes voeux, c'est mon cri. Mais voilà, tant pis.